we grew up in relative poverty. We were from Mississippi. My mom and dad worked full time, but they still struggled to make ends meet. And if you read that normal story, the idea would be we struggled and then I ascended. But really what happened was my parents made certain that we were always engaged. My mom would say, no matter how little we have, there's someone with less. Your job is to serve that person. My dad wasn't quite so dramatic. He was like, having nothing is not an excuse for doing nothing. And so they would take us to volunteer. We would volunteer at soup kitchens and homeless shelters. We would go to juvenile justice facilities. That stuck with me in part because my mom, actually it was my father, and we would go to these basically children kiddie prison. And we asked once why we were there. My mom and dad said, look, their own parents aren't here. These are children that people forget. They need to know somebody thinks of them and remembers them. And so I watched my parents, instead of just telling us to be good people, instead of saying you should serve, my parents did that. And that meant sometimes we were doing without, even though we would go home, we would be at a soup kitchen or homeless shelter, and then the lights were off at home. And we were eating what we called mom's specialty for like the third time. We didn't realize that was just the cheapest meat and the last box of rice. But my parents never let our economic situation determine our capacity either for giving or for achievement. They're kind of awesome people. I really like them.
I love a story about your father who was in the audience at one of your sister's graduation, and he stopped the proceedings because the principal had mispronounced her name.
Now, I have to put this in context. There's one high school in Gulfport, Mississippi. So all of the students in the city graduated from Gulfport High. We would graduate from the Coliseum, which is this big, huge facility. My last name is Abrams. So Andrea was the first person to walk across the stage. And they called her Angela Abrams, which is not her name. And they did not recognize that she graduated with honors, and she was one of the few African-American students to graduate with honors. Now, we're in the upper rafters, but we can hear really clearly. And so when the principal says Angela Abrams, my father and his dad, my grandfather, everyone's mad, but they are really mad. And so they get up and go all the way down, all the way to the stage, and find the principal who's doing he's calling out the names. And by the time they get down there, they're at least on the H's. And my dad, and the thing is, when we were like, oh God, when my dad and my grandfather get up, what happens is my mom's like, yes, you go take care of this. She never does it herself, but she eggs everybody on.
Go take care of it.
And so they stopped the graduation, and apparently there was a little dispute about what they were going to do, but they called Andrea back to the stage. They said her name properly, and she got to walk across again. If we were lighter toned, she would have been red the whole time. But it was a moment where it's hard to see our blushes, but we all knew the feeling. But for my mom and my dad and my grandparents, she'd achieved something, and they were not going to let her achievement be diminished by someone's mistake. They weren't going to diminish anyone else's opportunity, but they taught us you don't let someone take what is yours from you.